Montana Territory, 1872. The land stretched out before Wade Kincaid like an empty promise, vast, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to the suffering of men. At 26, Wade had already learned what many took a lifetime to understand. In this untamed country, a man rode alone or he didn't ride at all. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rolling prairie as Wade guided his dun gelding toward the distant lights of Silverdale. His lean frame, hardened by years of working cattle, sat easy in the saddle despite the day's exhaustion. A light stubble darkened his sun-bronzed jaw, and eyes the color of summer storm clouds scanned the horizon with habitual vigilance. Attachments get men killed out here. His father had told him before a Sioux arrow found his heart 5 years back. Wade had taken those words and built a life around them, moving from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough for folks to know more than his name and the quality of his work with horses. The Rocking M had been his home for nearly 8 months now, the longest he'd stayed anywhere since his father's death. Marshall Thorne, the ranch owner, was a fair man who paid well and asked few questions. Wade appreciated both qualities equally. As the first buildings of Silverdale came into view, Wade felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Towns meant people, and people meant complications. But Marshall had sent him with a list of supplies that couldn't wait, so into town he would go. "Just get what we need and ride out," he muttered to his horse. No drinking, no cards, no trouble. The words were still on his lips when the gunshots split the evening quiet. Wade reacted instantly, pulling his revolver and spurring his horse toward the sound. As he rounded the corner onto the main street, he saw a woman struggling with a man outside the general store. 3 more men watched from horseback, laughing cruelly. "Let me go," the woman cried, her voice clear and defiant despite her predicament. "Not until you pay your pa's debts, Miss Whitfield," the man snarled, twisting her arm. Wade didn't hesitate. He leveled his Colt and fired a shot over their heads. "The lady asked you to let her go," he called, his voice hard as iron. "I suggest you do as she says." The men turned, hands dropping to their guns. Wade recognized their leader, Frank Byers, a local rancher with a reputation for cruelty and a grudge against anyone who crossed him. "This ain't your concern, cowboy," Byers said, eyes narrowing. "The Whitfield girl's father owes me money, and I aim to collect one way or another." Wade kept his gun steady. "Seems to me harassing a lady isn't the proper way to settle a debt." The woman's eyes met his, fierce, proud, and the most startling shade of green he'd ever seen. Her chestnut hair had come partly loose from its pins, framing a face that struck Wade with its determined beauty. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Byers released her with a shove. "This isn't over," he warned, climbing back onto his horse. "Tell your pa I'll be back for what's mine." As they rode away, Wade holstered his gun and dismounted. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. "No," she said, straightening her pale blue dress with dignity. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Kincaid." "Wade Kincaid." He touched the brim of his hat. "And you're Miss Whitfield, I gather?" "Brielle Whitfield." She smiled then, transforming her face from merely beautiful to breathtaking. At 22, she carried herself with the poise of someone much older. "My friends call me Brie." "Best I get you home, Miss Whitfield," Wade said, deliberately using her formal name. "Those men might circle back." Her smile faltered slightly. "I have errands to finish. I'll wait." Something in his tone brooked no argument, and she nodded, disappearing into the store. Wade stood guard outside, unsettled by the strange sensation in his chest. It felt dangerously like concern, not the general kind a decent man might feel for any woman in trouble, but something specific to the proud set of Brielle Whitfield's shoulders and the flash of vulnerability he'd glimpsed beneath her courage. Dangerous indeed. When Brielle emerged, Wade insisted on accompanying her to her father's small ranch on the outskirts of town. Along the way, he learned that Thomas Whitfield had fallen ill last winter, leaving his daughter to manage their struggling cattle operation while caring for him. Byers had loaned them money to get through the harsh season, and now demanded repayment they couldn't yet provide. "Why not sell?" Wade asked as they approached the modest homestead. Brielle's chin lifted. "This land is all we have left of my mother. She died bringing it across half a continent in a wagon. I won't surrender it to a man like Frank Byers." As they reached her home, Thomas Whitfield appeared on the porch, leaning heavily on a cane. His weathered face brightened at the sight of his daughter, then clouded with suspicion when he noticed Wade. "Pa, this is Mr. Kincaid," Brielle explained. "He intervened when Frank and his men accosted me in town." The older man's expression softened. "Then I owe you thanks, Mr. Kincaid." "No thanks needed," Wade replied, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Just doing what any man would." "Not any man," Thomas said knowingly. "You'll stay for supper?" Wade opened his mouth to refuse, then caught sight of Brielle's face, hopeful despite her obvious attempt to appear indifferent. Against every instinct, he heard himself accept. That meal changed everything. The humble fare, beans, cornbread, and coffee, was served with genuine warmth that Wade hadn't experienced since childhood. Thomas Whitfield, despite his illness, possessed a quick mind and dry humor. And Brielle? She moved through the small cabin with grace, her quick intelligence evident in every word she spoke. As Wade rode back to the rocking M that night, the emptiness of the trail ahead seemed starker than ever before. Over the following weeks, Wade found reasons to ride into Silverdale with increasing frequency. Each time, he made a point of checking on the Whitfields. He told himself it was concern for their safety, nothing more. Marshall Thorne noticed. "Silverdale's got quite the draw for you lately," he commented one evening as Wade saddled his horse. "Just being neighborly," Wade replied stiffly. The older rancher's weathered face creased with knowing amusement. "The Whitfield girl is mighty pretty, I'll grant you that. It's not what you think." "No." Marshall removed his pipe. "Son, I've seen that look before." Just a word of caution. Thomas Whitfield crossed Frank Byers' back when they were both courting the same woman. Margaret chose Thomas, and Byers never forgave him. That debt is just an excuse to take what he's always believed should have been his. Wade's jaw tightened. All the more reason someone should look out for them. Perhaps. But Byers has friends in high places now. Judge Hollister owes him favors. The sheriff won't cross him. Dangerous waters to wade into, especially for a man with your past. Wade stiffened. "What do you know about my past?" "Enough to know you're running from something." "Not my business what. Your work speaks for itself." "Just saying, getting involved with the Whitfields means taking on Byers, and taking on Byers means drawing attention you might not want." Wade mounted his horse without answering. Marshall was right, of course. Attachment was dangerous. Involvement even more so. The smart play was to ride in the opposite direction and never look back. Instead, he found himself at the Whitfield ranch, helping Thomas mend fences while Brielle brought them water and smiled in a way that made Wade's carefully constructed walls tremble. By early summer, Wade was spending every free moment at the Whitfield place. He taught Brielle to shoot straight with his colt, showed her better ways to manage their small herd, and repaired the leaking roof before the summer thunderstorms began. In return, she filled the hollow spaces inside him with conversation and laughter and hope. "Why do you do all this?" she asked him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the tall grass. Thomas had already retired for the night, leaving them in the comfortable quiet of twilight. Wade studied the darkening horizon. "Seems like the right thing to do." "Is that all?" Her voice held a note he couldn't quite identify. He turned to look at her then, illuminated by the soft glow spilling from the cabin window. Her chestnut hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her green eyes held questions he wasn't sure he could answer. "No," he admitted finally. "That's not all." Before she could respond, hoofbeats approached. Wade was on his feet instantly, gun drawn as 5 riders came into view. Frank Byers led them, his face twisted in an ugly smile. "Well now, isn't this cozy?" he drawled, dismounting. "The drifter and the Whitfield girl." Brielle stood beside Wade, her shoulder brushing his. "State your business and leave, Frank." "My business is with your father," Byers replied. "Payments due in full by month's end. Judge Hollister signed the papers this morning." He tossed a document onto the dirt. "Can't pay? The land's mine." "That's half the time you promised," Brielle protested. Byers shrugged. "Times change. Maybe you should reconsider my other offer." His gaze traveled over her with insulting slowness. "One word from you, and all your father's debts disappear. All you have to do is be agreeable." Wade's gun cocked with an audible click. "Leave. Now." Byers' eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Kincaid. I've been asking around about you. Seems you've got quite the history down Texas way. Something about a dead marshal in El Paso?" The blood froze in Wade's veins. You're mistaken. Am I? Sheriff got a telegram just yesterday. Very interesting reading. Byers smiled coldly. You might want to consider your position carefully. I can make trouble disappear, or I can make sure it finds you. After they rode away, Brielle turned to Wade, her face pale. What was he talking about? Wade holstered his gun, not meeting her eyes. Nothing that concerns you. It does if it puts you in danger. She touched his arm. Wade, please. The gentleness in her voice broke something loose inside him. 3 years ago, I was working cattle in El Paso. The town marshal was corrupt, taking bribes from cattle thieves, looking the other way when homesteaders were driven off their land. I confronted him, things got heated, and he drew on me. I was faster. Self-defense, she said immediately. The jury didn't see it that way. His brother was the judge. Wade's voice hardened. I escaped before they could hang me. Been moving ever since. He waited for her to step back, to view him with the same distrust he'd seen in countless towns before. Instead, she moved closer. You're a good man, Wade Kincaid. I've seen your heart. Her hand found his. Whatever happened in El Paso doesn't change that. In that moment, with her hand warm in his and her faith shining in her eyes, Wade realized he'd already fallen far deeper than he'd intended. The thought terrified him more than any gunslinger ever could. Back at the Rockingham, Marshall confirmed Byers' threat. Sheriff's asking questions about you, he said grimly. Word is there's a hefty reward from El Paso. I'll ride out tonight, Wade said, already calculating how far he could get before dawn. Might be wise, Marshall agreed. Though I hate losing a good hand. I appreciate all you've done for me. Marshall studied him. The Whitfield girl, she know you're leaving? Wade's silence was answer enough. Running protects you. The older man said quietly. But what about her? Byers will take that land, one way or another. She's not my responsibility. No? Then why have you been riding out there nearly every day for 2 months? Why did you teach her to shoot? Why did you fix their barn when you could have been resting? Marshall shook his head. Some things are worth the risk, son. Wade spent a sleepless night weighing his options. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He would help the Whitfields one last time, find a way to clear their debt, then disappear before the law closed in. He rode to the bank in Silverdale and withdrew every cent he'd saved. It wasn't enough to clear the Whitfield debt, but combined with the cattle they could sell, it might buy them time to make a fresh start somewhere Byers couldn't reach them. When Wade presented his plan to Brielle, her eyes filled with tears. You would do this for us? I would do far more, he admitted. And then what? You'll just ride away? She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. Is that what you want, Wade? No, his heart answered. What he wanted was impossible, a life he didn't deserve with a woman he couldn't protect, in a place where his past would eventually catch up to him. What I want doesn't matter, he said roughly. The law's after me, Brielle. Byers made sure of that. If I stay, I bring trouble to your door. And if you go, you take my heart with you. The simple declaration stunned him into silence. I love you, Wade Kincaid. I think I have since you stood up to Frank Byers that first day. Wade closed his eyes against the sweet pain her words inflicted. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Her hand touched his cheek. All my life, I've watched people leave this harsh land, broken by its demands or lured away by easier prospects. But you face every challenge head-on. You see the beauty beneath the hardship. You understand what it means to fight for something that matters. Brielle, let me finish. Her voice held a tremor now. I'm not asking you to stay if it means your death. But don't make my decision for me. If you must run, then let me run with you. The offer shattered the last of his resistance. Wade pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers with desperate tenderness. For one perfect moment, there was no past to flee, no future to fear. Only Brielle's warmth against him and the promise of something he'd never dared to want. Reality intruded harshly the next morning when Thomas Whitfield collapsed. The doctor confirmed what they feared. His heart was failing, and he wouldn't survive a journey. They couldn't run, not now. As Thomas rested, Wade rode to town, determined to negotiate with Byers. If he offered himself to the law, perhaps Byers would extend the loan in exchange. It was a desperate gamble, but the only card left to play. He never reached Byers' ranch. Halfway there, the sheriff and 3 deputies intercepted him. Wade Kincaid, Sheriff Dawson announced. You're under arrest for the murder of Marshal James Layton of El Paso County, Texas. Wade considered his odds, 4 armed men against 1. Even if he outdrew them all, he'd be a hunted man forever. No hope of a future with Brielle then. Slowly, he raised his hands. "I'll come peacefully," he said. The cell was cold and damp, its single window offering a mocking glimpse of freedom. Wade sat on the hard bench, considering his options and finding none. The circuit judge would arrive in 3 days. By week's end, he'd likely be headed back to Texas to hang. His thoughts turned constantly to Brielle. Had she heard of his arrest? Was she caring for her father alone? Would Byers press his advantage now? The answer came that evening when Brielle herself appeared outside his cell, the sheriff reluctantly allowing her 5 minutes to speak with the prisoner. "You shouldn't have come," Wade said, drinking in the sight of her like a man dying of thirst. "Did you expect me to stay away?" Her voice was steady despite her pale face. "I spoke with Frank Byers." Wade's hands clenched the bars. "What did he say?" "He offered to drop the debt entirely if I would marry him." Her eyes held Wade's. "I refused." "Brielle, your father. My father told me to follow my heart." She reached through the bars to touch his face. "I found letters, Wade. Letters from the El Paso newspaper detailing Marshall Layton's corruption. Witness accounts of him drawing first. Evidence that was suppressed at your trial." Hope flared briefly, then died. "It won't matter. Not with Byers influencing the judge." "Perhaps not," she agreed. "But Judge Hollister isn't coming. There was an accident on the mountain pass. He broke his leg. The territorial governor is sending Judge Harmon instead." Harmon. The name stirred recognition. "Nathan Harmon?" Brielle nodded. "You know him? He was a friend of my father's years ago." For the first time, Wade felt a flicker of genuine hope. A fair man, by all accounts. "Then we have a chance." She pressed something into his hand, a small photograph of herself. "Keep this. Remember what awaits you when justice is done." After she left, Wade stared at the photograph until darkness made it impossible to see. He tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket, close to his heart, and allowed himself to imagine a future he'd never before permitted himself to want. Judge Harmon arrived 4 days later. The trial lasted just 1 day, with Brielle presenting the newspaper evidence and Wade testifying to Marshall Layton's corruption and the circumstances of their fatal encounter. Byers brought forth witnesses claiming Wade had confessed to cold-blooded murder, but under Harmon's stern questioning, their stories fell apart. The court finds the defendant acted in self-defense against a corrupt official, Judge Harmon announced to the packed courtroom. All charges are dismissed. The gallery erupted in mixed reactions, supporters cheering, Byers and his men scowling in fury. Wade barely registered any of it, his eyes seeking only Brielle. She stood at the back, tears streaming down her face, a smile breaking through like sunshine after rain. Freedom tasted sweet, but it was short-lived. As Wade and Brielle walked from the courthouse, Byers intercepted them, flanked by 3 men with hands hovering near their guns. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You still owe me, Whitfield. I'll have that land one way or another." "The debt will be paid," Wade said calmly. "Every cent, with interest." Byers laughed harshly. "With what? You're as broke as she is." "Not quite." Marshall Thorne stepped forward from the crowd, his weathered face serious. "Wade here has a job waiting and back pay coming. Plus, seems a few of us ranchers don't much care for how you conduct business, Byers. We've taken up a collection to help the Whitfields clear their debt." Byers' face darkened. "This is my town. You can't turn it against me." "Appears we already have," Marshall replied evenly. "Now, I suggest you take your payment and consider this matter closed." For a moment, it seemed Byers might draw. Then, calculating the odds, he snatched the offered bank draft and stalked away, his men following reluctantly. "He'll be back," Wade warned as they watched him go. "Let him come," Brielle said with quiet confidence. "We'll face him together." Thomas Whitfield lived to see his daughter married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony attended by neighbors and friends. Wade, clean-shaven and dressed in new clothes, stood tall beside Brielle as they exchanged vows beneath the cottonwood tree where her mother was buried. That night, as they sat on the porch of the cabin that was now their home, Wade finally gave voice to the transformation within him. "All my life, I believed the only way to survive was to stand alone," he said, holding Brielle close as the stars emerged above them. Trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death in this unforgiving country. Brielle leaned her head against his shoulder. And now I understand what my father never taught me. That true strength comes from having something worth fighting for. He turned to look into her eyes, still marveling that she was his. Everyone told me to forget you, to run while I still could. Marshall, the hands at the ranch, even my own instincts. But I couldn't. I'm glad you didn't listen, she whispered. Wade thought of all the lonely trails he'd ridden, all the nameless towns he'd passed through, all the years spent guarding against attachment. None of it had brought him the peace he'd found in Brielle's arms. When I was in that cell, facing the gallows, I realized something, he confessed. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of dying without having truly lived, without knowing what it meant to build something lasting, to love someone completely. Brielle's eyes shimmered in the fading light. And have you found that now? Wade looked out over the land they'd fought for, the small ranch that would grow under their care, the future they would build together. Then he looked back at the woman who had shown him that even in the harshest wilderness, love could take root and flourish. This land, this life, it's still untamed and dangerous, he said thoughtfully. But for the first time, I'm not facing it alone. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You asked once why I helped you and your father. Now I can answer truly. Because from the moment I saw you standing up to buyers that day in town, something in me recognized something in you. I was lost without knowing it, and you became my compass. Brielle reached up to touch his face, her wedding band catching the last light of day. You risked everything for me, and gained everything in return. Wade pulled her closer, his voice rough with emotion. All those years of wandering, and now I finally understand. Home isn't a place. It's where your heart finds peace. Brielle smiled up at him, her face luminous with love. You are my home now, Wade Kincaid, and I am yours. As darkness settled fully over the Montana prairie, they held each other beneath the vast canopy of stars, two souls who had found in each other what the frontier so often denied. Not just survival, but the promise of a life rich with love, built on trust that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger for the flames.